And what I'd like to talk about is being scared. I don't imagine there's anybody in here that's nervous about getting started on this thing or what you're going to do or how it's all going to work out. But I know in some conversations just here this weekend, I've heard people talking about they haven't gotten a business card yet together yet because they're not sure if they're going to be a writer. And so I'd like to talk about being scared. My first travel writing seminar was last year in San Diego. And the first article I wrote was in that seminar, just like we did yesterday, and it actually got published 6 months later in Edible San Diego in the print and online edition. And since then, I have been published over 20 times. However, as impressive as that sounds, I assure you, by the time I'm done here, you will be a lot less impressed, which is good for you because you'll find out that the world isn't everything it's cracked up to be. So I'd like to ask, how many in this room have a dog at home? Okay, well then with all those dog owners, how many of you have ever heard of a thunder shirt? We all know what a thunder shirt is. Dogs get scared during thunderstorms, so you put this thing on them and they calm down and they're a lot better off. Okay, well, writers also have a thunder shirt. I wanted to show you, I'm wearing it. Okay, and this is also referred to as an anxiety jacket, and it has about 25 pockets in it, and I got it as a gift right after I got home from the San Diego seminar, and I put it on, and my problem was when I went on my first interview, it had so many pockets, it took me about 10 minutes to find out what pocket I had put anything in, and I was starting to look and act like Columbo, if any of you are old enough to remember that. The other thing I need to tell you to get down to earth about this thing is, at the time I was living in Minot, North Dakota, and there's some things you really need to know about North Dakota, but probably would be afraid to ask. I was 50 miles from the Canadian border in the middle of nowhere. To give you a frame of reference, the entire state of North Dakota, it's a big state. The entire state of North Dakota has a population approximately 1/4 the population of the greater Denver area. There's not a lot of people up there. I'm in San Diego at a writing seminar, and the first thing they said was, go local. I went home and I asked my wife, what am I going to write about? I'm in a town of 40,000 people and fine dining is the truck stop. So a nurse in town says to me, well, you know, there is a rock museum about 45 miles from here called the Paul Brasti Rock Museum. So I asked around, and probably 2 out of 15 people had ever heard of it. So I got out a map, I found the town, I drove 45 miles to the Paul Brasti Rock Museum. It was locked up, there was no one around, and there was a sign out front. So I read the sign, and I was supposed to call the curator. The curator was in her early 80s and lived 2 blocks away. This town had a population of about 800 people. So I called her, and she walked over to the museum and opened it up and spent about 3 hours with me walking through this museum. And she was the only employee, and she was paid for by I don't know what kind of proceeds, because it didn't look like too many people came to this museum. But we go through and I'm interviewing her, and lo and behold, we come across a rock, and she says, oh, you see that thing right there? She says that rock has been appraised at over $1 million, and the Smithsonian Institution would like to have it. And I was like, oh, I think maybe I have a story. So we went through the Rock Museum, and I thought, okay, now I had just learned about all of these queries you have to send out, and I'm thinking, all right, I have a story, but who am I going to query? So I thought, well, we'll start with regional magazines. Well, it turned out there weren't any. So that will shrink down to the local level. Well, what do we have here? Well, we don't have a local magazine, but we do have a newspaper with a population of 15,000 people. So I asked around, and here, as luck would have it, the editor of some 35 years had just retired, and there was a new editor in town, and he had started a week before. So I went down to the newspaper, I just walked in, and I went up to the counter, And I already had my cards made out, so get your cards if you don't have any. Be brave, it's all right. You can burn them later if you decide to change your mind. All right? But I handed out my card and said I was a writer and could I talk to so-and-so, the editor. I expected a barrier to be thrown up. Who are you? Do you have an appointment? All of that. None of the above. They said, oh, just a minute. And they disappeared and they said, okay, go on back. And I said, well, where's on back? So they showed me where his office was and I walked in. And this guy hadn't even really fully unpacked yet. He still had stuff all over the place. And I sat down and I said, hi, I hear you're new in town. And he says, yeah, I'm still unpacking. And I said, well, you know what? I've been where you are. You're going to need a friend. My name is John Bechtel. And that's how I got off to a start with my first editor. And I said, oh, by the way, I said, what kind of editorial policy are you thinking of pursuing? And he says, well, I got to tell you one thing. He says, these local papers, the first mistake they make is they try to cover national and international news. He says, local papers are for local news. And I said, I'm so glad you said that because you know what? There's a rock museum around here that people have not talked about in years, and I think it would make a great story for your paper. And he says, I love it. I was in. That was not a stroke of brilliance. It was the only thing I could find. I walked in and this guy had just landed and was still unpacking. So I guess what I'm saying is whatever it is that you're afraid of, stop being so afraid because you know what? A lot of times randomness just takes over and good things happen if you get out of bed. While I was there, I had already done a brochure. I had written a brochure for a foundation, a fundraising kind of brochure for a foundation. And I reported to a committee of 5 people. So I wrote the copy for it, and then I had to present it. And I was reminded of something I learned in the seminar last year in San Diego, which you have also heard this weekend, and that is, find out what your readers read and write for your readers. Well, I had a lot to learn about my readers. I really didn't know my readers. I hadn't been in that town and that state very long myself, so I had a lot to learn. So I put together this text for this brochure, and I'm reporting to this committee of 5, and these are all guys, and I would say the median age was probably 80. And I had written something about, putting out there the wonderful things this foundation did and the service it provided for its donors. And I said, it provides concierge service. And these 5 guys are looking at this, and one guy says, this concierge service, he says, I don't know if that's something we want to put in there. And so I was like, okay. He says, what is that anyway? Well, I just learned something about my readership. All right, about what to write and how to write. And I never forgot that as long as I wrote there. So anyway, the Paul Brosty Museum made the press. Is this on? Oh, there's the entrance of the Rock Museum. That's the guy, Paul Brosty. The story about Paul Brosty is he was a farmer that lived about over 100 years ago. And this was a guy who loved rocks more than farming. And my story was about farmers don't like rocks. Rocks are a problem. And back then when they had a horse and buggy, it took a lot of work to get a rock out of the field. This guy loved rocks. He souped up his ancient Cadillac so he could load it up with rocks that he collected without breaking the springs. And finally, he sold his somewhat substantial farm and acreage so that he could devote all of his time to this museum. So there you can see some of the rooms in the museum, and the bottom left you can see Doris, the curator. She's such a dear soul. All right, and after the article got printed in the paper, she said, that was just the best coverage we've ever had on this rock museum. I want to thank you so much. And I said, you know what? I said, would you mind calling the publisher of the paper and telling him what you just said to me? She says, oh, I would be glad to do it. And I thought, okay, that's a start for my first testimonial. going on from there, I knew I needed to break out of the local market. So I talked him into an article on a Mall of America. I pitched it to the paper. I said, this is like 500 miles away. And I said, can I do an article in the Mall of America? And he said, yes. And by this time, it is late October, and I'm thinking, okay, it's too late to get an article on Christmas at the Mall of America, so that's not gonna fly. So what in the world am I gonna write about? So I'll show you what the article turned out to be. 6 things I learned at the Mall of America without shopping. And the way I pitched that to the paper is, you got a lot of oil workers up here, and they got cash in their pockets and no place to go. We need to tell them about the Mall of America. Then I wrote emails to the Mall of America. I found the vice president of public relations, and I said, you know, you got a lot of people over here with cash in their pockets, and you should be marketing to them. And he said, you know what? You're right on, come on over. So I went over, and in a 3-day weekend, they gave me $800 worth of freebies, including free lodging at probably the premier hotel in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then a couple of months later, I get a phone call from the newspaper, and the editor says to me, the publisher wants a column in the paper on food and restaurants. You interested? I said, sign me up, coach, I don't smoke. And that's how I became a columnist. And that's how I got a lot of articles in the paper, and I'm going to tell you about just one of them. Oh, by the way, this right here is a testimonial I got from the vice president of public relations for the Mall of America. He was a wonderful person to deal with, and if you look at that, you notice what he said. I love the fact that you didn't write about shopping. He says that's what everybody else does. Again, it's just a matter of finding out what's happening, what the opportunities are, and going with it. Okay, now I want to tell you about my big story as a food writing column. It was a truck stop, of course, what else? So I went to the truck stop, and I went in and asked who was in charge, and I got this young lady that you see in the bottom photograph. Her parents had started it about 35 years before. It had grown into something like a $30 million a year operation. This truck stop never served less than 1,000 meals a day. Okay, it was phenomenal. They never close. They are open all day, every day, with no exceptions, no holidays. They are always open. So I'm sitting down with this young lady, and I'm interviewing her, and her phone rings. She gets real quiet, and I hear a lot of and then after she hangs up, she says, that was my mother. Now, her mother and her dad were the ones who started this truck stop, and this young lady was running it because mom and dad were starting up another truck stop about 300 miles away. And she says, I told her that I had a writer here who was writing a story about our restaurant. And she says, my mother said, get rid of him. Don't talk to the press. And I thought, the press? I'm in the press? Since when? But anyway, I wrote the story, and I want to show you what happened to this thing. Take a moment to read what this lady, I asked her for a testimonial. I think she's the writer, not me. I mean, what she wrote about what I did and how I did it, and all the comments that she got from the article in the paper and whatnot. And then later she said she wanted me to write a corporate history, a family history for them and their family. So anyway, that's how I got into this thing. That's how I got all those articles. And I want to tell you 3 things that I learned real quickly. Okay. People asked me when I was writing all these restaurant articles if they could preview what was going to go in the paper. Okay, and you might get that sometimes, so I want to tell you what my answer to them was. If you want editorial control, it's called paid advertising, and that'll cost you about $1,200 for this article. If I write it for free and you don't know what's going to go in there, you take a small risk, but I don't say bad things about people I write about. So nobody wants to read about where not to go or where not to eat, so you got nothing to worry about. But if you have to see the preview, you have to talk to the publisher and pay the money. And nobody asks for that. And the other thing I got to say is, deadlines are good for you, They make you get things done. I had to work a lot harder, and I was always at the last minute to meet a deadline. But I have to tell you that I always tried very hard before I hit that send button to get really, really good copy. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and no matter how hard I tried, a month later I would look back at it and I would think, oh my God, I can't believe, what was I thinking? All of my articles are up on my website, and I believe you can start with Facebook, but sooner or later you're going to want to get to a website. And I had a wonderful guy who did this website for me. Before that, I had somebody else I paid $4,000 to, and I threw it in the trash after I paid him. It was a terrible job. So you're getting the right website and the way you want it and whatnot, your vision is really important. But all of the articles I've written are up there, all right? And I only want them up there to impress possible editors and publishers that I might want to write for. And then I hope they really don't read the whole article, because I know what's in those articles. Thank you.